All right, here we go. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for a With Me webinar on the topic of trends in multifamily co-working spaces in 2023. We're so happy that you're here with us today. This presentation is brought to you by WithMe, the multifamily resident amenity partner, helping you deliver elevated living experiences with tech-powered printer and coffee amenities. Print with me and sip with me. Some quick housekeeping rules before we get started. You'll see that all participants will be on mute throughout the presentation. You can send your questions to us through the Q&A or chat features in Zoom. Your questions will be answered during the Q&A part of the presentation, which is at the end of the presentation. And lastly, we are recording this presentation and we'll share a playback with all attendees. What we'll cover in the presentation, this will be an hour-long presentation covering best practices for creating and managing multifamily co-working spaces delivered by a panel of industry experts. And with that, I am happy to introduce your host today, Jonathan Treble, founder and CEO of WithMe. Jonathan, I am going to let you take it from here, introducing our panelists and kickstarting the presentation.
Thank you, Becky. It's so exciting to have so many people join us today. We are thrilled to have an all-star panel here of not only great industry professionals, but folks that I can call friends. And starting out, we have Tamina Sheikh, Senior Regional Property Manager at Lincoln. We have Jonathan Evans, Senior Director of Asset Management at Greystar, and Tyler Yates, the Managing Director of Property Management and Operations at Cedar Street. With that, we'll jump into our first some statistics to set the stage. These statistics are really eye-popping. Going back to 2019, pre-pandemic, only 5.7% of Americans worked remotely, but now 27.6 million do as of September 22, and that's 18% of the population. So that is over 3 times swell in people working remotely. And another data point to keep in context, only 50% of available office space in the country is currently being utilized. So what does that mean for where people are working? Well, they're probably working in their home. And with that, let's move on to the first topic slide, setting the stage, the future of work. So to try to dial in on how many folks are working from multifamily, panel, do you have a sense of what percentage of your residents are working from home, either fully or partially?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me here on the panel. Great to know you, Jonathan, as a friend, but also been enjoying the WithMe products in a lot of buildings. So thank you again for having me. To answer that question, it really just depends on what your product is, where it's located. Is it in an urban or suburban location? Is it class A, B, or C? Knowing your demographic is going to be key, and that's going to really change, the amount of the property that's actually utilizing or working from home. So we're seeing anywhere between 5 and 30%. Obviously, 30% is really more of that class A, newer product in an urban location, whereas that 5% is probably in a suburban location, maybe a B minus. But we do see more people using this in like a tech or financial centric hubs, employment hubs. So that's where we kind of see more heavier concentration.
Great. Tamina, Tyler, does that jive with your experience as well?
Yeah, I would say that I would mirror quite a bit of that. My portfolio is primarily downtown Chicago, high-rise properties, but it really does even vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. So property style, the job profiles within the building, but I would say like the 20 to 30% range that Jonathan noted is probably pretty accurate in my properties as well. But as we think about how to outfit these spaces and how much space we need per building, we really do think about the neighborhood. So my West Loop and Fulton Market District properties are going to see a higher, tech industry profile. So we're going to have more work from home space, where my Loop property is going to have a lot less, just because these are more of their finance guys who are going into the office every day. So I mean, one of your statistics was that 18% of people are working remotely, but that really is a lot of hybrid work as well. So a lot of people are still going to the office, even in these tech industries and things like that. So in my properties, we really see kind of a revolving door in those spaces. It's not the same people every single day, but I would say on any given day, it's about 20 to 30% of the property that is actually working from home.
Wow. Yeah, 3 to 4 times as much as pre-pandemic. That's quite a surge. Tyler, does that also track with your portfolio?
Yeah, we had surveyed our residents during the peak of the pandemic and then post, and during the peak of the pandemic, it was as high as 32%. Today, that's closer to 29%. So it hasn't dropped significantly. We do expect it to maintain at that level. And to Mina's point, it's interesting to keep in mind that it's not just remote, but hybrid work as well. And to Jonathan's point, it does depend on the asset class, which informs the demographic and the submarket, because we have certain properties that were as high as 50%, and we've had other properties that were as low as 5%. And so it does range drastically, but for our portfolio, it's still around that high 20s mark.
Got it. Okay. Well, leading into our next question, do you have a sense of how frequently your co-working spaces are being utilized?
Quite a bit. It's a lot every day. It's increased so much too that we've actually had to increase cleaning services as well, janitorial services on site. And so we've all been at properties too where you go to some of the spaces and they're not activated during the day, but for the most part, we have seen optically a significant increase in utilization of our spaces today compared to pre-pandemic. And whether that's in co-working spaces that were built specifically for co-working, or that's smaller communal areas, we've seen a heavy increase on a daily basis. And that's not just on the weekends, but that's Monday through Friday as well. And on top of that, we've also just seen heavier traffic during periods of time of the day on a Monday or Tuesday that you just wouldn't have seen pre-pandemic. And we think that's here to stay.
Got it.
Yeah, just to echo the same thing, it's, when those spaces are done right, people want to be there. And you see that frequency kind of pick up because people do develop relationships. If you think of the WeWork concept, initially and all those other co-working spaces, they wanted to create community. It's great to create community in the community that you're living in as well. So if you can create that space that's inviting, that people want to utilize, they'll even jump into it. It's for a quick phone call or to kind of clear their head and they're tired of working in their apartment. They need a new, scenery. We see that a lot is where someone says, yeah, I work in my apartment, 4 hours a day, but I come down here the last 4 hours. So it is like a revolving door. I think that's what Tamina said as well, is you don't see always the same people. You just see people kind of utilizing at different times, different days all the time.
Got it. So next question, before we go into tactically, how are we coping with this? Does anybody here on the panel have a sense from survey data? And I know all three of you survey your residents frequently. Have residents expressed what amenities have become more or less important with this shift toward hybrid and remote work?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Every single year, NMHC, multifamily housing, NAA, Greystar, we're always surveying our residents to find out, are we building right? Are we retrofitting correctly? Is this still important, or is there other things that are more important? We get a sense of a lot of the same things that come to the top, but you have other things that are starting to rise, such as co-working. But things that are still important is secured community access, a pool, package lockers. But you start to get into other communal spaces like rooftop decks, clubhouses, a Wi-Fi cafe. What we're seeing is people are tending to jump into the space that maybe wasn't purely designed for co-working, but they want to utilize it. So they might be still important, right? Like a pool, but can they put their laptop somewhere and utilize that? So we are seeing like business centers start to rise a little bit, or a Wi-Fi cafe start to rise, but community-wide Wi-Fi is another thing that's extremely important to people because they don't want to lose that connectivity. They want to be able to take their laptop and walk out of their apartment into that space that they want to utilize without actually dropping a Teams call or a Zoom call.
Great point.
Yeah, I would kind of piggyback onto that same thought process that I would say all the similar amenities that we've seen over the last, 5 to 8 years coming out are still all very much used, but now they double as a work from home space. So I've many times walked into a game room or a golf simulator room, and there's people with their laptops working there instead of, playing golf. So, and maybe they're taking a quick break every so often and doing some swings, but the majority of the time it's being used as amenities. So I think it's still very important to have the robust amenity offerings, but also thinking through each of those individualized spaces on how somebody might work from there as well, because they will. So if that's additional shade at your pool area, adding some cozy up tables at your lounge chairs, your game room, instead of just having high bar stools, having some comfortable work seating. Our media rooms, I think, are used quite a bit for work from home now. So just adding additional lighting in there is a huge addition. So I think all the same amenities are still just as important, but thinking that they will double during the workday.
This is a great segue to our retrofitting strategy on the next slide. And I just want to say, I wish I could work in a golf simulator. That sounds fantastic. First question on this slide. So with the rise of remote work and people staying on site to work, have any of you had to find additional net new space to accommodate this well?
Yeah, a few assets come to mind in different markets, some that have heavier student base where it wasn't necessarily a dorm living, but it was close to maybe a university. And we had to look for additional space because residents are asking, hey, I need to work somewhere. I can't work. There's a loud resident that's next to me. And, if you know property management, I know a lot of people on this call do. And there's so much we can do about that noisy neighbor at 2 p.m. So we've converted laundry rooms to, a co-working space or several laundry rooms because, it's a large property. So trying to kind of scatter around and have people have different locations that they can plop down, or an outdated hovel looking business center that we thought, we could just throw a chair or two in there with one desktop computer. We're finding if there's a way to knock down that wall and expand that into a kind of more of an open concept and see, if we do it right, will people actually want to come and enjoy these spaces? We don't want to just check the box on the website and say, hey, we have co-working at our property. Look at us, but it's, hey, are people actually going to use this? So we do think through a lot of those things. And we are looking for net new space that people can utilize. And because, right, if they're utilizing the amenities, they call it their home, they build that community, retention levels are likely to, stay level or increase, right? That's what we want. Is at the end of the day, we're trying to create a home for people, but at the same time, maximize the investment that, investors are, buying these properties for. So, we're seeing a lot of retrofits going on for that.
All makes sense. Anything to add to this one?
I'll just jump into Jonathan's point and say, I think to his point, experience trumps everything. So at the end of the day, you can be more impactful with 500 to 1,000 square feet if you do it right, versus if you blow it on 2,500 square feet. It doesn't need to be a checkbox on the website. It needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be a space that residents want to enjoy. So I think it's all about doing it right to create the right experience for your residents.
Yeah, and just kind of keep adding to this is look for in places this net new square footage in places that you necessarily wouldn't have considered before, such as a leasing office. Maybe during the day, the leasing office is, for that activity, right? You have your leasing associates, your sales manager, but at the end of the day, they're able to lock up their stuff, put it away, and then people can utilize that space for co-working. They can utilize the space. Maybe it's an Uber waiting area. It's a multi-use, location on the property. But think through that as, even the mailroom. And believe it or not, we're seeing a lot of new builds, and it's pretty cool mailroom. I wish I had a mailroom like that. But even tables or chairs that are in there, because a lot of times people come in and out of a mailroom, but it's normally pretty quiet. And so people actually plop down there and have utilized those areas for co-working space. Or another thing you can do if you don't have a lot of space, but you know it's important to people, there's the quiet or silent pods that you can buy. And if you can find the right location and put them, you have a co-working space, or you have a breakout space for people to actually be able to utilize, and is a good amenity for your residents.
Great discussion. Well, this is a good segue for what to do with that net new space. And that's our next question. What renovations or technology investments have you added to spaces that were built pre-2020? And Jonathan, you already touched on this. Is your go-to the pod, the space pod, the phone booth, if you will, or is it that and other things?
Yeah, it's probably not that all the time. That's probably more special circumstances. They are big and bulky, and it's not like you want 18 of them lining a room, because kind of just sucks it up. So we are comfortable seating is something that in the past I feel like we really didn't think about it. It was more design over function, and now it's can someone sustain sitting in this chair for more than 30 minutes? Is this somewhere that they can actually sit down, get productive work day in, and then leave feeling good about it? That's we're looking at that, or seating that is not facing each other is another thing. So people don't want to utilize a space where they're sitting at a table and then the booth that you set up, it's like, hey, we got booth seating, we got this nice table and chairs over here. But if everyone's staring at each other, you find that people actually don't use those spaces a lot because they still want to be private, but in a public place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that these older, pre-2020 buildings goes back to the outfitting of these other amenities and making them comfortable, like Jonathan is saying. And from a comfort perspective, I think we always hear chairs, which he said, which is really chairs and lighting are probably the two biggest things that we hear. But then also just the energy and the vibe in the area, right? So making sure there's, good artwork, that there's live plants, that it smells good, the temperature's right. So just really thinking about all of these things from a comfort level in the space is important. And then you don't have to completely renovate a space to make it great for work from home. There's some low investment cost changes that you can either add or change, which would be adding in plug and play monitors, extra keyboards, laptop stands, so that way people can either have like a standing desk if they want to. Presentation screens are really important. I think whiteboards you'll see in some of the older buildings, but going in and adding in an updated electronic whiteboard, like Vibe has a great product out there. So that way you can still have collaborative meetings with people that are working in other remote places. Conference call speakers, mini fridge. I think adding in just an area where people can take a little break, go to their Sip With Me coffee and grab a coffee, get a snack out of the fridge, and maybe even have that like water cooler area that people can hang out in, the old school water cooler combos. So I think just there's a lot of things you can do to not have to do a full renovation, but still make these spaces very relevant for people who are working from home.
Yeah, and not to be contrarian, but I would say the design is more important than the tech at this point. I think the tech is almost a given and it has to be there. And that's between the Wi-Fi, the access control, and everything else. At the end of the day, it comes down to the experience. And I've learned so much of that getting to work out of WeWorks at various locations in Chicago, and then getting to work with WeWork, partnership with Cedar Street, how important the design is to make sure that residents and guests are comfortable coming in, and that the entire experience from the time they enter the building to the time they leave the space is perfect. And that has everything to do with the design, the FF&E, the furniture, the layout, all of those things. And if you're going to do food and beverage, do it right, do it well, make sure the entire experience is perfect for your residents and your guests.
Yeah, the two things on a technology front that you must get right, I would say, is Wi-Fi. And I would connect that also with, cell signal. Those two things, if they don't have it, they're not going to be there. And the other thing is, like, I'm sure we've all been in airports when you're trying to plug in a laptop or a cell phone and you can't find a, plug anywhere. That's another thing, is invest in furniture that combines kind of outlets and a seating area, or have additional outlets installed on the wall if you're doing more of a retrofit. But if you don't want to pull permits and stuff, but look for that furniture that allows people to sit down and connect and be there for a while, because they're going to leave when that device dies or gets low.
Excellent points. Well, I just want to point out that there are a couple questions that I'm seeing come in Q&A. So folks that have asked questions, we have a section toward the end of the presentation for live Q&A. So thank you for sending those, and feel free to add more, but we will get to those. Now we're going to segue from retrofitting pre-2020 spaces to new construction design. Lots of folks in our audience tend to be on lease ups or even, pre-development design teams. And we have folks in our panel who have deep experience with that. So first question here, for new construction, are you seeing an overall increase in square footage being allocated to co-working spaces?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. It's something that is, even pre-pandemic, this was something that developers, when we were already advising on, to add this in. So even my pre-2020 new construction projects that opened maybe at 2019, 2020, we were already adding in this additional space, which is additional conference rooms, additional work pod rooms, libraries that are specifically meant for this. So if I was to advise future developments on the type of space that we're seeing more utilized that has been developed, is doing the smaller rooms. That is 1, 2, and up to 4 people in the room. Those are the ones that get used the most. Conference rooms are still a must, because you do want to have a space that people can collaborate in, but those are utilized the least amount out of all of these, enclosed work from home spaces. So that's really what I'm seeing, and having nice lounge areas attached to your work from home space so that people can take that break, go meet other people in the building, get some fresh air if there's some outdoor space available. So I think those are all important things to add on to, the new development addition of work from home rooms in our buildings.
Yep, I can jump in there too as well, just to echo Tamina's point. We, yes, are seeing an increase in appetite ourselves and with investors or LPs in allocating more square footage to co-working spaces. I think there's a lot that you have to figure out between if it's a public, private model, the square footage. There's an increase in cost, right, on the front end during construction. And then there's an ongoing cost that can increase, whether it be utilities or cleaning costs, janitorial services. But in general, the appetite is there. I think that everybody now is trying to figure out what the correct allocation is based on the asset class and based on the submarket, which I think is going to dictate everything. Ultimately, the square footage, and then the capital that's committed to invest in it. But the appetite is there. I think everybody in our industry, on the ownership side or on the operator side, believes that co-working is here to stay. And so, yes, for us, we're absolutely seeing an increase.
Great. And you mentioned something that is a great segue for our next question, which is the public-private model of co-working. And I know, Tyler, you specifically have some great experience here. So maybe starting with you, have you explored and what has come from your exploration with hybrid public-private co-working?
Yeah, so Cedar Street has Bridgeview Bank, which is a 176 unit mixed use development. It's adaptive reuse as well. So the building's over 100 years old. And one of the problems that we ran into, and there's always a problem with adaptive reuse, normally a major problem, which is how do you retrofit the entire building in specific spaces? The specific or particular problem with Bridgeview Bank was it had a 25,000 square foot grand historic lobby with extremely high ceilings. And so that problem was, what do we do with the space? Eventually, we figured out that we could run co-working out of it. And then there were thoughts that we could do it ourselves. We eventually landed on a partnership with WeWork, which is a rare deal with them because they're managing it for us. Truly third party. And so now that WeWork is managing the space today, we do have this amazing model where we have WeWork running co-working space out of Bridgeview Bank for the public, but we're also able to leverage very heavy discounts for our residents to run something like a public-private model as well, which, to Jonathan's earlier point of retention, we're really bullish that we're going to have higher than expected retention there. That's going to bode very well for us to be able to compete in that submarket, because it's an amenity and it's an experience that you really can't get at any other building. You can truly work, live, and play at that space. And so been a learning lesson for us and extremely exciting partnership for Cedar Street. And I think we're going to start to see more of those deals come down the pike over the next several years as well.
Very interesting. Jonathan or Tamina, have you explored this model?
Yeah, so the model we explored was, let's see if we can keep it in-house. And that is a very difficult, endeavor to take on, because if you don't have enough space, it doesn't make sense. Like, a WeWork's not going to want to, do a partnership, because it's not going to make sense for their model as well. So trying to kind of make this a profit center at the same time is probably not the best direction to go if you can't, I guess when I look at it, like when the WeWork partnership, it's almost like a tenant that you have. If you don't have a space that you're going to have a tenant like a WeWork come in and really operate, I would say focus more on the design aspect and doing it right, but then allow kind of a first come, first serve basis of people to come in there and do it, because the model that we tried, luckily it kind of happened at the pandemic, but we were also letting the public come and use it. But people were utilizing it. But after the pandemic, it's got to be in the right location for people to want to come in there. But you still got to balance access control, safety. Does your maintenance costs go higher? Do I have to hire another porter? What is the true benefits of making this kind of a public amenity rather than just keeping this as a private amenity that, it's kind of baked into your rent?
Yeah, that's a great point Jonathan brought up to be clear for the audience, that you're not going to be able to make sense out of outsourcing the management of a co-working space. And Jonathan, give me your thoughts as well. But I think it's typically at like maybe 15, but probably 20,000 square feet. It has to be a very large space to make economic sense and for the deal to pencil at the end of the day. And so if you do have that, ability to retrofit, which is rare, probably more on the new development side, could we do that? Then it's just a matter of risk at the end of the day, and it's just risk, reward, and opportunity. So that's a great point Jonathan brought up.
Well, moving on to our next question, and this one has already been echoed in our Q&A, so folks are very interested in this. What FF&E and design trends are you embracing to help residents work comfortably, particularly from these new spaces that are in design right now? And I know folks have opinions on the panel here. We want to even specifically ask, though not limit this discussion, there's a debate between conference rooms or phone booths, or maybe neither. So if folks have particular views on this, feel free to add those.
I didn't realize my comments were creating some controversy in the in the chat. But I would love to hear everyone's different points on it. I don't necessarily have a preference one or the other. Kind of just whatever your space and the square footage that you have available to use for co-working space kind of drives a lot of the design that you're going after. But actually, I'll pass it over to Tamina, because I know that she was jumping in on this.
Yeah, I think that the design does go back to our original conversation, which is, what is your demographic? So if you have a high student base property, you're going to want a conference room because they're going to want to have study groups that are going to get together. Where if you have, a more professional demographic, then I think the single phone booth type rooms are going to get used a lot more. So you number one have to look at your audience and decide what is the best thing for that property. Sometimes the floor plate you're working with dictates that as well. And then even creating spaces that can double as both. Once again, if you're doing a renovation, make a room that has a partition wall that can be a conference room on one day, but can be two singular rooms on another day. We use different technology platforms to be able to make reservations for those rooms, so you can just reserve them accordingly. So I think those are the big components on the type of space. I do think soundproofing is really, really important. We find rooms that are not soundproof, people steer away from those. If you can hear their conversation outside of the rooms. So I think that's really important. And then just going back to my original recommendation on just making sure everything is comfortable. So on the FF&E and design, lighting and seating, I'm going to say that over and over again, because those are the two things that I think are the most important things that we hear from our residents. We do use designers from time to time to help us with these spaces when we're doing a true renovation. So just give them that feedback on what your demographic is. And a lot of times they'll help you, do a more curated design. But I think those are my big recommendations on that.
Excellent. All right. Well, on top of the FF&E for furniture, I think the next question has to deal with amenities. So what amenity improvements are you making to help your residents who are working from home more frequently?
I'd say the one thing that we're really looking at and focused on right now is Wi-Fi, and really that managed Wi-Fi, community-wide Wi-Fi. As I mentioned before, it's, they really want that, from their dining room table to the pool to the clubhouse to that dedicated workspace area that you created. They want that constant connectivity. They don't want to all of a sudden be walking through the corridor. And you guys, we all know that sound when Teams or Zoom is trying to reconnect and you're like, hold on, or you're going through an elevator and it's 4 or 5 floors down and you're going to drop the call and have to reinitiate the call. Working through that and making sure that people can just continue on the same network that's still private, secure. There's no risk on that part of it if done right. You have the right system in place. But I would say that's probably the biggest investment. The things that we are looking at on the technology side is managed Wi-Fi, or even fiber, right? Managed Wi-Fi doesn't always make sense for your investment model. So maybe it's fiber and partnering up with an AT&T or Verizon, where they'll come and drop in the fiber at no cost or very little cost. And your residents can have super fast internet speeds in their apartment or in the common areas.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too and say Wi-Fi #1 for us. 2 would be package delivery services in-house. The problem pre-pandemic was that you had residents leaving in the morning and coming back during the day. And so we couldn't get enough residents to sign up, to sign forms, allowing us to enter their apartment when they weren't home. And so that was an issue. But now, because we have more residents that are working from home, whether it's full-time or it's hybrid, we do have the opportunity to build value back in at the community and to have packages delivered there. And even going back to cleaning, it's not an amenity, but I would say, our OpEx has increased a little bit, because if you used to have to staff 1 janitor at a property, it might be 1.5 now part-time. There just is more wear and tear. So I think it's also just extremely important to make sure that your entire community, front to back, inside and out, spotless at any given time, because the traffic is just heavier today.
Excellent.
Yeah,
All
to
right.
kind of jump into other technologies to still prioritize within these spaces, or even for people to enjoy working from home is I love the WithMe products, because it's something that was really embraced at my last firm that I was at. We did it in a big way and did it portfolio wide, but it was, making sure that there's some sort of printer, that a lot of times we're removing printers, and it makes sense in some cases, but people, if they're going to work from home, a lot of times they also don't own printers, or they want a quick cup of coffee, but they want to do it quick, fast, and not have to walk into the leasing office. A lot of times, if it's in a space like a clubhouse and a co-working space that's dedicated, it's another amenity that will actually keep people there and saying, I can work from here. Just like when you build out a gym, right? Like, hey, I can cancel my gym membership and just work here. There's a savings that is implied by having the right amenities and right technology and equipment at your properties that people really truly value.
Great. All right. Last question on this slide before we go to some closing thoughts. So this gets back to the idea of conference rooms. So I know some of you have conference rooms in your properties, and I don't know if we've settled the conference room phone booth debate, but even if we haven't, I imagine that there are some of these spaces that can be reserved, and they may or may not only be co-working spaces. They could be event spaces. How, maybe just for the audience, has anybody on the panel found some great technology or great ways to efficiently enable residents to reserve these spaces that doesn't take a lot of burden on your on-site teams?
Yeah, our properties all utilize their resident app that they use. And so it's a one-stop shop. So if you have packages, what events are going on in the building, and what co-working spaces are available. So I have really enjoyed working with Lively on all of my properties right now. So their system has a lot of different ways that you can reserve it, time slots. Same thing with guest suites, which is unrelated to this, but it's just a really easy way to do it. And it takes a lot of burden off of our team as well, because it doesn't have to have any on-site management oversight is very all-encompassing, but there's a lot of different resident apps out there that can do that. That's the one that's worked well for me though. If you don't have a resident app, then I've also seen picktime.com, which is kind of a similar product to a Doodle. I think we've all used a Doodle before. So picktime.com is if you don't have a resident app in place, is another great product.
Great. Appreciate the advice there for the audience. Let's move on to our last topic, and then we will go into Q&A. So for closing thoughts, and maybe each panelist can answer these two questions together. First, what are your predictions for the future of co-working spaces this year and beyond? And then if you could give the audience one piece of advice about co-working spaces, what would it be? Let's start from the top of my screen. So Tyler, you are up first.
Yeah, I think for predictions, I think co-working spaces are going to be, I think they're going to be more popular and hot to trot on the new development side. It just is harder to retrofit spaces. It's easier to pencil it into the deal. But I do think the trend is going to be on the new development side. That's not to say that it's not going to trend on the existing properties, retrofitting, but I think as we see the numbers continue to maintain post-pandemic, I think that is going to make real estate developers and owners and operators more bullish on designing these new development deals to have purpose-built co-working spaces, professionally designed with designers, architects, et cetera. So that's my prediction. My one piece of advice about co-working, I would say go, if you haven't already, go secret shop just like you would any of your comps. Go visit WeWork, go visit Industrious, and not just one. I have an all access membership with WeWork, and I go to 2, maybe 3 different ones a month, depending on where I'm at. And to some of the previous points Jonathan and Tamina made, it's interesting how the dynamics are different at each property. And so if I go to the WeWork in Fulton Market, it just is a different dynamic, different views, different experience than there are WeWork communities that are in the Loop. And so I would encourage people to go visit, to take tours, to go visit a WeWork, Industrious, whatever is closest to you. And if you don't have one close to you and you're somebody in the audience, to go and do the virtual tours online, go to the website, see the experience, read the reviews about it. And then paired with that, if you can, and it's available in your submarket or your market, I would go visit any property that has built in a retrofitted co-working space, whether that's new development or that's an existing property. So you can see how similar those experiences are, and then you can put them together, because some of the best points I think Tamina and Jonathan made in today's presentation, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can take advantage of. So take advantage of it, and then learn from the pros that are doing it today, and don't shy away from your comps just because they might have been first to market. See how they did it, and then talk to them about it too, because they'll give you some great intel on what worked, what didn't work, and if they could go back again and redo something, what they would do.
All right. Thank you, Tyler. Tamina, you are next.
My prediction is that the hybrid work from home model is going to continue to grow, as we've seen not only over the last 3 years, but over the last 10 years. So it is something we want to keep on the forefront of our minds when we're doing new developments or retrofitting or doing renovations within our building. But I do think that a lot of companies, and not only companies, but people realize the benefits in in-person collaboration. So I think our amenity in multifamily specifically, I think our amenity spaces probably won't grow in conjunction with the amount of people that have the opportunity to do that. So I don't know that we need to take entire floors of our buildings and turn them into work from home spaces, but it's just something to think about as, we do add in amenities and just kind of grow with the community over time, which kind of goes into my advice, which is to really just listen to your residents and what do they want. I think resident surveys are a great tool. We use Ellis surveys at all of our Lincoln properties, and we gain a lot of insight into what people want from that. And kind of what Tyler was saying about going and shopping WeWorks or different products like that is go work from your amenity space for a day. See if it's noisy, see if it's cold, see if it's clean, if it, like really fill it out, see if enough electrical outlets are there. So use it for yourself and make sure that space is somewhere that you would want to work for an extended period of time. And what can you add to make it better? And then just being malleable over time. This is an ever-changing space right now. And so, just paying attention to what is going on in the market, shopping comps, seeing what's out there, and being malleable with your overall plan. as this space continues to grow.
Great advice. Thank you, Tamina. And last up, Jonathan.
Yeah, really to piggyback on all that, I agree with everything they're saying. Get out, shop your comps, know your market. That's key because, you know, if you don't know your market, you don't know your demographic, the workforce, the employment landscape, is it the, I mean, you don't even know if it's the right thing to do. But once you've done kind of that due diligence, you know, and you think, you know, I need to jump in with 2 feet and do it right so that it actually is utilized and it's not just all of a sudden nice fancy FF&E that, you know, never has to be replaced, although there's some merit in that. But, you know, you still want to create that community. You want people to be there, make friends, because at the end of the day, higher retention, higher, you know, rents, you know, those things are important for our overall business. So we want to do it right. I completely agree with them that co-working is going to continue. It's here to stay, either on a full dedicated co-working space or on a hybrid where it's incorporated into other amenity locations on your property. But it definitely should be a part of your thought process if you're planning on a renovation of a clubhouse, a laundry room, or on a new build. Looking out, you can kind of incorporate a hybrid location of it. So I don't shy away from doing it, because you hear kind of the tech companies, you know, 100% comeback. You know, Elon, you know, he has his opinion, he has a loud voice, but at the same time, there's a lot of companies that are promising to their employees that they can stay on a hybrid work basis, and that's still what they're selling to, hey, come to work for my company. We're hybrid, so you only come in a couple days a week, or you choose your schedule. That, I think that model is here to last, whereas at 100% back is probably not as, you know, people aren't driven towards that as much anymore.
All right, great insights. Thank you, panel. Let's jump over to Q&A. I'll continue moderating this. We have several questions in here. So first question, and I'm gonna name the person when they've chosen to do that. There's some anonymous ones. So first question is from Emily Moore. Do people use the TVs in the conference room? And if so, what do they use them for? Presentations or just connecting their laptop for a bigger view? Does anybody have some intel on this from the panel?
I would say that TVs are an underutilized piece of the amenity, but they still get used from time to time, so I would not eliminate them. Typically for collaboration, more than somebody just posting there or putting their own laptop up on the screen. That's why I would actually recommend having like plug and play monitors available. I don't think most people want to work that far away from the screen, but they do have, you know, team meetings here and there, study groups, that you want to have that television there, even though you might not notice that it gets used every day.
All right, great. Next question is from Peter Chan. Do you see any material increases in common area utility expense concurrent with the increase of these resident accessible co-working spaces? Electric, water, internet. Good question.
I would say that was the one thing that caught a lot of companies off guard, was when we locked down, all of a sudden we kind of thought, oh, okay, well, you know, business as usual. But then we saw a spike in all of our utilities because people were staying at home. They're utilizing these amenity spaces when they were open. We do see a spike in this. Now, unless you have a gigantic outfit that you've partnered with an operator and it's dedicated for like a co-working space, you're probably not going to have a material increase if you decide to have co-working a part of your business model. But I would say that you will see an increase.
All right. Next question is from William Moore. How would you advise reserving a limited number of work from home spaces available to residents? So I think if you have constraints and there's too many residents, not enough spaces, what might you do? Particularly perhaps conference rooms, I'm guessing, right? The more private spaces. Does this get back to the resident apps?
Yeah, it does. And this is a challenge, is you'll have somebody come in and block off 8 hours and they don't show up for even one of those hours. So we have talked about implementing a check-in process so that if you haven't checked in within 10 minutes of your reservation and somebody notices that it's empty, we will allow them to use it. So I think having a check-in process would be important. I'm actually talking to the apps to see if that's something that we can add. It's not an option right now. But otherwise, just having management available to monitor that if they see a space is empty, but that it shows that it's reserved, checking in, allowing people to use it. But I would recommend having reservations done on an hourly basis and letting people reserve up to 4 hours at a time is probably the fairest way to do it.
Yeah, even jumping in on that point, Jonathan, it reminds me, and you'll appreciate this, of the problem pre-print with me and pre-with me of the resident who is printing a 500-page thesis in the business center. And, so your technology changed that too, where you have cost control measures in place. And to Mina's point, I think that's extremely important to make sure that you have that set up in the resident app, so you're not upsetting other residents.
Yep. It sounds like there's great app solutions out there for that. Speaking of hardware technology, there's an anonymous question. Do you see the need to supply stationary computers, or do people these days always use their own?
Well, my personal opinion is no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say no. Everyone seems to have their laptop and what they prefer to work on. If they do, it's just not utilized that much anymore. No one's needing to jump down there to print a boarding pass or what say it. But if it is probably more your class B minus or your C product, that's a demographic that may not be able to afford computers and have that available. So that's where I would say you need to look for more. But like a class A, B plus product is not somewhere that you would necessarily need to go and spend that extra dollars for it.
Okay. Got it. Next question is from Sheila McDowell. I have an office that is for ACM that is not used often. I have considered utilizing the space for residents to use. However, knowing it's in our office and adjacent to the manager's office, that is a concern. Any insight or thoughts on this?
I think you have to make sure that it works for the residents and the team. If the manager's office next door is going to be problematic, going back to what Tamina said with sound issues, it's probably a bad idea. Now, if you can fit it out and soundproof it, I think that's a good idea as well. I think it depends on the experience again that they're going to have. But if you could soundproof it, and then there's also 2 separate paths, walkways that they're coming in and out of. That specifically, though, sounds like a sound issue that you would have to fix for something like that. But if you can, I think there's also ways to trial it. So you don't have to go gangbusters on it. On a big FF&E package, you could do some lighter model to see if it works. And that might be important in a situation like that before you commit to a bigger capital cost.
Okay. Next question is from Courtney Bousset, I believe is how you pronounce the last name. What space is too small for a private work from home space, in your opinion?
Well, phone booth. I mean, I think that goes back to that point. So I guess 1 check mark for phone booth. So 8 by 4 feet or so is about all you need for one of those. But again, it doesn't have to be something that is, labeled as co-work. It could just be an underutilized space in a leasing office, clubhouse. If it's in a leasing office, it's something definitely to weigh your options, as Tyler was talking about. What is the pros and cons for the team? Is it truly set up? Do you or even residents want to be in a location that's shared with the person who's also increasing your rent on a yearly basis? So you got to think through those kinds of things, but you really don't need a lot of space, because you'll see in even WeWorks or you see in other co-working, it only takes a chair and a small table for someone to be successful, and more about sound and privacy than anything else.
Another anonymous. Oh,
Lighting again.
Yep, lighting. Next question is from an anonymous attendee. Do you think offering snacks and other beverages is essential in these co-working spaces, in addition to typical self-serve coffee? So They list out kombucha, cold brew, packaged snacks, etc. Any thoughts on that?
I think a pantry would be a fantastic addition. I can't imagine that that doesn't add a lot of additional value. I actually don't have it in any of mine, but it's something we've talked about. But yeah, a pantry option as an amenity, not only for your workspace, but just for residents in general, I think is always an upgrade.
Yeah, if it's a paid option rather than, hey, it's, grab and go and free, I think you're going to see a spike on your marketing costs or where you add those dollars to. We shy away from doing that really because the coffee, there's some sort of control sometimes on it, or if there's no control, it's just your standard coffee machine. It'll be sitting in your leasing office, and most of the time people don't come in there with a jug and fill it up, although we do have those offenders. But I would say that we probably wouldn't do it from a cost standpoint. We just end up paying more than the benefit that we get
Okay.
if we supply.
Yeah, and that's why I want to buy the pantries. I should have clarified that is the paid pantries. Now, a pop-up resident event here and there in your, in your space could be, a nice resident retention effort that once a month on the last Friday of the month, you have a pop-up event where you have snacks and drinks in the co-working space could be something fun. But definitely to Jonathan's point, I think a paid pantry or a nice vending machine in the property is a value add.
Yeah, I would agree with Tamina there. I think that's a far more important point. I mean, WeWork does that really well too. And I'd worked out of WeWork for a longer period of time. And I wasn't so much excited about the free beer and coffee and cereal throughout the day. It was more when they catered in on specific days of the week or the month. And I think that's just a better solution because it's so cost prohibitive. I mean, we've all done model fridges and we know what the cost is to do that. And it could easily hit $500. And then you're having to explain that expense, and the ongoing expense to supply it yourself doesn't make sense. I think it's just a better value grab to be able to build that in, doing it once a month, to Tamina's point.
Cool. Next question. Do any of the panelists have a recommendation on space utilization technology? I would like to get real utilization data on each type of co-working room / pod. Interesting.
I would say that kind of technology is proprietary. Like the best technology to this, WeWork has it, Industrious has it. There's probably some other agnostic softwares out there, but I do not know of any. That's where I would say, back to Jonathan's point and Tamina's too, it depends on your demographic, and you should poll your residents to figure that out. But I do not have an official answer to that.
Okay. Have any of the panelists started to program lockers into work pods? Any thoughts or lessons learned?
I have not. I've thought about it, but that's not something that I have piloted yet. So I think it's a good idea. We used to do wine lockers in buildings. Nobody really used them for wine. They just used them for storage. But I would think that having a few lockers that somebody could rent just to leave their things close to the pods would make a lot of sense.
Okay. And last question for time. Do any of the panelists have experience charging a small fee for co-working spaces per day or hour? I guess this is again in a constrained environment. Do you think this is a structure that could work well in multifamily?
I think you'd only utilize that outside of if you're trying to do co-work in a large way. You'd only utilize that if it's constrained. So Jonathan, to your point, if you have so many residents that want to use a certain space and there's just not enough space to give, you can't expand it all, that's when you would need to kind of figure out if it's outside of a reservation system and if still demand, is charging a small fee and see if that demand lessens, right? It's a simple economics equation is how do we lessen the demand? And if we need to charge for something to do that, then that's what we'll need to do. But back to my original point, co-working spaces is likely not your profit center. So not thinking that that's going to be a line item that you're going to point to and say we're increasing, NOI by X because we're implementing this.
I agree with Jonathan there wholeheartedly. I think when you start this exercise, whether it's the first question you ask or you ask it down the road, is what's the goal? And is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? If you're trying to push rents 3% above market, you're probably not wanting to push and require a charge there because you're wanting to sell this as a value add to residents. So I fully agree with that.
Okay. Well, panel, thank you so much again. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to help educate fellow peers in the industry. I'm sure folks are very fortunate that you shared your insights today. And I know each of you has a lot of experience with these types of spaces. So I think we actually don't have a last slide. If anybody is interested in contacting anybody on this panel, you can reach out to us at the WithMe team. We can try to broker that introduction because these guys are experts. But thank you again, panel, and thank you, audience, for joining us. We plan to put on more great programming for our industry over the coming months ahead. So thanks again. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.